I've seen the season 3 finale of Star Trek Lower Decks entitled The Stars at Night, and now it's time to talk about it. If you wish to live a spoiler-free existence, now is your final chance, so on with the show. Since I mentioned in my last Lower Decks video that I would have to retroactively give my final judgment on that episode based on this finale, I suppose that would be a good place to begin. I have to say that while I found this to be a pretty solid episode, it kind of sealed the fate of my distaste for the events of the last. I shouldn't really lump every storyline in with that comment, but the entire plot revolving around Mariner getting falsely kicked off from the ship while the entire crew turned against her, it just felt wrong. I was willing to give it the benefit of the doubt, hoping that it was in service to some daring undercover plan a la Gambit from TNG or Investigations from Voyager, something along those lines. And with all the things that are revealed about undercover operations in this episode, that would have seemed like a perfect fit to me. But alas, that was not to be, because Mariner was disingenuously booted from the Cerritos for absolutely no reason other than to get her into position to save the day at the end of this episode, only to be welcomed back into the ship and crew as if nothing had really ever happened. And also, the events that happened while she was off the ship, while fun, didn't really fit with the whole storyline because it was just a way to force her into doing something. I do promise that I will get to the things that I did enjoy in a moment, but allow me to continue my hate train for just a little bit. This is really something that dragged down the whole season for me. I'm aware that this show is a less serialized show, something without as much emphasis on overall character growth as your typical new Trek live-action venture, but that's nonetheless still an important aspect of this show, and I thought we had grown well beyond the whole Mariner screw-up just to piss off her mother rivalry that we started the series with, and to be wrapping up the third season just diving right back into that same well, it really doesn't sit very well with me. I will touch on this a bit more at the end with my series-ending thoughts, but I do want to take a break from the negative elements right now and touch on some of the positives from this episode, because there were quite a few. Now, the overall story of this episode was very engaging in my opinion. It was nice to have a fairly high-octane finale while at the same time not involving a galaxy-ending event. The stakes were pretty high, especially for the fleet and the station and the California-class ships, but it wasn't really at the level of what something like Discovery or Picard had been trying to do these past few years, and for that I am very, very grateful. I am sick and tired of things that are going to blow up the entire galaxy or destroy life as we know it. That's not a very Star Trek-type storyline. Every once in a while, it's interesting to see those events, but if you keep ramping up and you keep ramping up and you keep ramping up, just nothing's going to feel good. I like these more localized effects. I like the more localized storylines that while they still have danger, while there are still dire consequences that could occur, if all of these ships blew up, if that space station blew up, if all of those characters lost their lives, the Federation still goes on. The Romulan Empire is still there. The Klingons are still there. It doesn't change the face of the entire universe as we know it. And those are the things that I think are a little too over-eagerly done in a lot of the shows these days. The plot being a direct result of Admiral Buenamigo was well implemented. I hadn't really mentioned it up to this point as I really didn't think much of it at the time, but he really did have a bit of a sinister air about him in a few of his prior appearances, and I just kind of chalked that up to how the character was voice acting, or just maybe there was a little shady side to him, but I never really put it down to something that was going to come into play as a major plot point down the line. And for that, I think I have to give them some credit. They laid enough groundwork to make it feel earned without pointing at it and yelling at your screen like, oh, look, he's a bad guy, he's going to turn evil. So that, I think, was well done. The only thing I think is a downside is obviously the bad admiral is kind of a trope in Star Trek, but that's not something that I necessarily hate because it works for the storyline. While the emergent AI of the Texas-class ships was nothing new or shocking, it was a valid twist and a good enemy, at least for the constraints of this storyline, and even if it did seem eerily reminiscent of how Discovery ended their season a couple years ago with that whole control plot, I think it still worked for what they were trying to do. Now, this is something that I found goofy and unrealistic. I did enjoy the Second Contact race event. I almost wish they had spent a little bit more time with this, maybe even expanded this episode to be a little bit longer, maybe like a 40-minute episode, and this would have felt a little more earned. But this was a bit hurried, I would have to say, and I really would like to see the Cerritos do a bit more of that work since it was the initial mission type of their vessel, and it would have just been a cool way to bookend the season 1 and season 3. I don't think this is the end of the show by a long shot, but assuming it was, it would be a great bookend to have the first episode and the last episode deal with the second contact stuff. I think my favorite part of this conspiracy issue was the reveal that Rutherford was the initial designer of the AI on these new ships, and that Badgie was created using the same code. The whole mystery flashbacks that had been teased since season 1 and then more fully explored earlier this season resolved with this mystery, and I found that to be a great overall story arc, one that I really didn't see coming up in this finale at all. Buen Amigo was the commanding officer, that one that appeared in shadows all of those flashback times. That was great too. Obviously, seeing the older style Starfleet uniforms, fantastic as well. And just to have this 3-season story arc for Rutherford finally coming into completion, that was great. I can't wait to see what may or may not happen with this character going on into the future, assuming we get more of this show. I also really love that they finally paid off the Vulcan to Lynn joining the ship after she was pretty much teased as becoming a character all the way back in season 2 and then never addressed again this season. I thought she would be coming on in the first episode, and then I kept waiting and waiting and waiting. No references whatsoever. Now she finally joined the Cerritos an entire season later. I'm interested to see where they go with that. The subplot with Mariner and her roguish girlfriend was fun, but based on how we came to that idea, how she got off the ship, how she fully realized this adventure, that's a reason I can't fully enjoy it. It was a nice twist to discover that there was nothing nefarious going on with her, that she was actually doing real old-fashioned archaeological work as funded by Captain, well, I guess Admiral Picard at this point. That was a cute little twist. But in my mind, and probably in a fan servicey world, the only reason Mariner and Freeman should have acted the way they did to even get to this point for Mariner to leave the ship was to get her off the vessel for a reason, to get on this roguelike vessel in order to operate outside Starfleet parameters. They would be able to cloak their investigations into possibly Buen Amigo and perhaps even Section 31, which I assumed would be tied in based on the transporter clone Boimler reveal from a few episodes ago, in legitimate archaeological digs so that they could go off the grid and do this outside of the Federation or outside of Starfleet bounds. Freeman would be able to operate as normal on the Cerritos, allowing for all to be revealed in some sort of big victory play by the end of the episode, which would result in a conspiracy being foiled and exposed. All of our crew would finally be playing into their teamwork and working together well, but instead we fell back on that tired old trope of Mariner and Freeman at odds with each other with unearned resolution and no Jennifer follow-up at all. That was something that really burnt me because the entire crew, except for our main lower deckers, completely turn their backs on Mariner in a completely unearned and unwarranted way, including Jennifer, her basically girlfriend at that point, and then we didn't even get a follow-up with that, and that's, I don't know, it just feels like they erased 3 years of work just to give this unearned situation in this episode. I also didn't feel like the Starfleet Board of Admirals deciding to scrap the California class completely, including their entire intended second contact missions, based on one failed swing-by attempt. That didn't seem genuine at all. However, since I do view this show as just being a TV program within the Star Trek universe, I can at least forgive these seemingly dumb decisions because they don't actually have to feel realistic to make for a gripping animated show within that universe. So I won't fault them too much for that, and we've seen similar situations in this show in the past. That was a lot of S's in a row. I'm sorry about that. All in all, I think that while this season had some pretty outstanding episodes, and that it allowed for most of our main quartet to grow and change, it failed to outgrow the box that it had already created for itself. And while that may not be entirely fair because there may never have been any intention to outgrow that box, maybe they felt comfortable there, it just feels like too much stagnation and not as much fun as I would have hoped for, especially coming out of last season, because I would have to say that season 2 was fantastic, and this just kind of feels like a step down. They fell back on some of the old humor and the old tropes, and sometimes, a bit too often in my opinion, the episodes felt more like an Easter egg-a-thon than a real coherent storyline. That isn't to say that I want the show to go away. I still find lots of elements engaging. And to date, it is still the most TNG era looking Star Trek that we have had since, I want to say Voyager went off the air. Again, I do adore Enterprise, but it had such a distinct style that I really can't loop it in with the TNG DS9 Voyager era stuff. I just hope that when season 4 comes along, we have a bit more cohesion in the storylines, the characters truly feel like they've grown over the past 4 years, and especially Rutherford, I feel like he should have an entirely new perspective next year after what was just revealed in this episode. And also Tendi, she now has a new Vulcan bestie, which should add a nice unique element to the show, which now brings me to my question, are they going to have 5 main characters next year? Or is this Vulcan just going to be a side character? Or are one of our main quartet going to go off and do something else? Is Rutherford going to transfer away? Is Boimler going to go somewhere? I don't know. Are they going to up that to 5? Are we going to have a big shakeup, or will things go back to normal? Who's to say? I'm looking forward to see what comes next. I'm also hoping they learn from some of the mistakes of this season. What are your thoughts? Did you enjoy this episode, this season? How do you feel about Lower Decks overall? Leave all your thoughts below and go ahead and smack that like button while you're down there. It looks like my next Trek video will probably be talking about Prodigy. So until next time, computer, end program.